It was a cold, mist-drenched morning in the small coastal town of Dunwich, nestled along the jagged cliffs of Suffolk. The air clung to the skin like wet wool, and the streets lay empty, save for the occasional gulls screeching overhead. Eleanor Blake, a quiet yet curious teenager with a knack for noticing things others overlooked, made her way through the winding alleys behind her school. Her bag hung loosely from one shoulder as she paused by the iron gate that led to the old library. A strange sound had caught her attention, a low hum, like the distant echo of a cello being played underwater. The fog thickened around her, and for a moment, Eleanor felt the world shift, as if time itself had held its breath. She shook her head and walked on. Strange things weren't exactly new in Dunwich. The town had always carried whispers, tales of lights flickering in the woods, old fishermen disappearing with no trace, and the sea itself singing during certain nights of the year. But Eleanor never believed any of it. Not really. Inside the school, everything felt ordinary. Or at least as ordinary as a Wednesday morning could be. Her best friend, Callum, greeted her with his usual smirk. "Did you walk through that cursed fog again?" he teased. Eleanor rolled her eyes. "Don't start. I heard something weird, that's all." Callum raised an eyebrow, but didn't push further. The day passed in a blur of lectures and yawns. But when Eleanor stepped outside again in the late afternoon, the fog was still there. Thicker. Heavier. As though it hadn't moved all day. She pulled her coat tighter and turned down the path by the harbor. Her feet moved on instinct, drawn by something she couldn't name. It was then she saw it, a figure standing perfectly still at the edge of the pier. Tall, cloaked in shadows, facing the sea. Eleanor stopped. The figure slowly turned, and though the mist veiled their face, she could feel its gaze, deep and ancient. Then, just like that, the figure vanished into the fog. Eleanor stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. The whispering fog curled around her feet, and deep inside her chest, something stirred. The following morning, Eleanor awoke with a jolt. A faint trace of that whispering fog still lingered in her thoughts, like a dream just out of reach. The memory of the figure at the pier clung to her like sea salt on skin. She didn't speak of it, not even to Callum. She knew how it would sound. As she made her way downstairs, she noticed something odd on the doormat. A letter. Unmarked. No name, no address, just folded parchment sealed with red wax. Her mother must have missed it. Eleanor picked it up, heart fluttering, and turned it over in her hands. She broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet, its ink faded but clear. "You've seen it now. It sees you too. The veil is thinning. Watch the water." No signature. No explanation. Eleanor read it 3 times before slipping it into her coat pocket. The words echoed in her chest, stirring that same strange pull she'd felt by the harbor. School passed like a shadow. She couldn't focus. The letter throbbed like a second heartbeat against her side. Callum noticed her distracted silence, but didn't push. He'd learned by now when to wait. After the final bell, Eleanor didn't go straight home. She returned to the harbor. The fog was thinner now, but the sea remained strangely still, like a painting. She approached the edge of the pier and watched the water. Nothing moved. No boats. No birds. Just silence. Then the surface rippled. Not from wind. Not from tide. It shimmered, faintly, as if something beneath it had stirred. A flicker of movement danced across the water's skin, like a shadow trying to break through. A whisper brushed her ear. Not from behind. From within. Soon. Eleanor stumbled back, heart pounding. The fog, though sparse, suddenly felt alive again. And then she noticed something carved into the wood beneath her feet, words worn with age, hidden beneath the moss and salt. The next day brought rain, steady, cold, and relentless. The kind that seeped into your coat and thoughts. Eleanor sat at the back of the school library, a history book open but unread before her. Her eyes drifted toward the tall arched windows where rain ran like tears down old glass. She had barely slept. The warning etched on the pier, "Beware the hollow deep," repeated itself in her head like a song with no end. She hadn't told Callum. She didn't know how. What would she say? A whisper followed me home, and now I'm watching the sea for ghosts? But she couldn't shake it. So she searched. Not on her phone. The signal was always terrible in the old village library. Instead, she scanned the dusty shelves for anything: local myths, sea lore, old journals. Her fingers paused on a cracked spine that read Devonshire legends and forgotten places. Inside, pressed between yellowed pages, she found a map. Hand-drawn. Faded. The village was there, Brackmere, though older, smaller. And to the west of the harbor, inked in small, curling script, was a name she hadn't seen before. The Hollow Deep. Her breath caught. She flipped pages quickly, and near the back found a story, barely a page long. The Hollow Deep, a place once whispered of by sailors too old to sail and children too young to know fear. Said to lie beneath still waters west of Brackmere's pier, where the sea swallows voices and the fog remembers names. Those who see its signs are marked, drawn to return. The veil grows thin when the moon wanes, and the hollow stirs. Eleanor's skin chilled. It was too close, too real. Her fingers trembled as she closed the book. "You all right?"
She jumped.
Callum stood beside her, holding 2 mugs from the vending machine. She nodded, but her voice was tight. "Found something weird." He handed her the warm paper cup and sat beside her. "Is it ghost weird or Eleanor weird?" She passed him the book. His brow furrowed as he read. Then he looked up slowly. "We should tell someone." "Tell them what?" she asked quietly. "That I got a letter from the sea, and it's pulling me toward a ghost map?" He didn't answer right away. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant. Inside, the lights flickered. Callum leaned in, voice low. "Then we find out for ourselves. Tonight." Eleanor stared at him. She knew it was mad. She knew they'd be breaking rules. But something in her, something beneath the fear, wanted to know. She nodded. "Tonight." The wind cut sharp as Eleanor and Callum stepped onto the pier that night. The air was thick with salt and mist, and Brackmere's lights glowed weak and far behind them. The tide was out, revealing black rocks slick with seaweed, and the moon hung low and thin, a pale slice of bone. Neither of them spoke. They had said all they needed back at the village green: flashlights, phones, and an old compass from Callum's dad's fishing gear. The book was in Eleanor's rucksack, wrapped in a scarf. The Hollow Deep. That's what they were looking for. Though neither of them truly knew what they expected to find. Their footsteps echoed as they walked the length of the pier. The planks groaned with age and damp, and beyond the edge, the sea stretched black and endless. Eleanor stopped first. Callum almost didn't notice. "Look," she said. There, in the shallows beyond the rocks, was something strange. A shimmer. Like the sea itself was breathing. A slow pulse of light, not from above, but from beneath the water. Callum stepped closer. "That's not a reflection." "No," Eleanor whispered. "It's something else." Suddenly a sound, distant but clear.
A chime.
Like bells. But not from a church. These were softer, sadder, and they echoed without wind. Callum turned to her, eyes wide. "We shouldn't be here." "We're already here," Eleanor replied. Her voice was steady, though her hands were not. She took a step forward, past the edge of the pier. Her torch beam hit the rocks below, and something glinted, a shape half submerged. She crouched, heart hammering. It was a stone marker.
Carved.
Weather-worn. Almost swallowed by seaweed. On its face, a symbol. A circle split by a line. The same one from the envelope. Eleanor's breath caught. She reached down and froze. The water near the rocks began to shift. Bubbles. Then, slowly, impossibly, a hand broke the surface. Pale, long-fingered, dripping with black water. Not reaching for her. Just rising. Eleanor stumbled back, slipping on the wet stone. Callum grabbed her arm and yanked her up. "We're leaving," he shouted, dragging her toward the pier. The water surged behind them, but no wave came. Only that sound. The distant bells, now louder. Closer. They ran. Rain started to fall again. Not heavy, but cold as ice. Their footsteps thundered along the wooden planks, and neither dared to look back. At the end of the pier, they stopped, panting. Eleanor clutched the railing, her eyes wide. What was that?
Callum gasped.
Eleanor shook her head. Her voice was barely a breath. I think it saw me. Brackmere's library stood quiet in the morning fog, the kind of silence that made Eleanor's skin crawl. It was too early for visitors, but the caretaker, an old woman named Mrs. Havish, let them in with a grunt and a curious look. You're up early, she muttered, her voice gravelly. Books won't answer what the sea's hiding. Eleanor didn't respond. She and Callum headed straight for the back of the library, where the older records and town documents were kept. The lights flickered as they passed through the narrow aisles, dust swirling in the air. They were looking for anything about the hollow deep, the symbol on the stone, and the bells. The sea had shown them something last night, and now it was impossible to ignore. Callum opened a ledger dated 1892. Listen to this, he said. Several disappearances reported along Brackmere's coastline. Locals speak of voices on the wind. Children warned to avoid the shore after dusk. Eleanor's hands tightened around a leather-bound journal she had pulled from the shelf. The cover was blank. Inside, the writing was shaky, like from someone half-mad. They are not gone. The ones taken. They whisper through the tide and wait beneath the sand. I saw them when the moon was thin and the fog did not lift. I saw their eyes in the sea. A chill passed through her. This isn't just legend. Callum nodded grimly. It's happened before. They kept reading, tracing stories and notes, most of them fragmented. But again and again, the same symbol appeared. The circle.
The line.
Some pages even had sketches, the same stone marker they had found at the pier. Then Eleanor found something else, a map. Faded, water-stained, but clear enough. A cave system under the cliffs to the north of Brackmere. The hollow deep. She pointed. It's real. And someone mapped it. Callum leaned over. Look, these markings here. There's an entrance. A noise suddenly echoed through the library, like a door slamming. But they were alone, weren't they? Eleanor stood. That didn't come from outside. They crept through the stacks, the library feeling colder now. At the far end, past a wall of records, was a narrow wooden door. They hadn't noticed it before. Should we? Callum whispered. Eleanor reached for the handle and turned it. The door opened with a groan. Inside was a small room, circular, with no windows. Shelves lined the walls, filled with items rather than books. Old trinkets, candles, bones. In the center was a table. On it, a box. Eleanor stepped forward and lifted the lid. Inside was a bundle of seaweed, still wet. Beneath it, a pendant, shaped like the same circle and line symbol. As she touched it, a whisper filled the room. Soft, impossible. Not from outside. From inside their heads. Return what was taken. Callum gasped. Did you hear that? Eleanor's fingers tightened around the pendant. Her eyes didn't leave the box. They know we're coming. The cliffs north of Brackmere rose like jagged teeth against the gray sky, their edges battered by centuries of wind and tide. Eleanor and Callum stood at the base, boots crunching over salt-stiff grass and sharp stones. The pendant had grown warm in Eleanor's pocket, pulsing faintly, as if aware of where they were headed.
This is it, she said.
The map shows an entrance near the third outcrop. They climbed in silence, the sea crashing far below. Crows circled above, their cries lost to the wind. The sense of being watched returned, prickling at Eleanor's neck, though the cliffs seemed empty. They reached the third outcrop. Beneath it, half hidden by thorny shrubs, was a gap in the rock, low, dark, and wet with sea spray. Callum crouched and peered inside. It goes down, he said, voice tight. Far down. They lit their torches and crawled in. The tunnel was cold and narrow. Salt dripped from the ceiling. Their lights barely cut through the thick dark ahead. The deeper they went, the less the sound of the waves followed. Silence folded around them, heavy and damp. The path twisted like a snake. At times, it widened into open stone halls, carved unnaturally smooth. Eleanor ran her fingers along the wall, damp but warm. almost alive. Symbols were etched everywhere, hundreds of them, all variations of the circle and line. Some seemed fresh. Then came the noise. A low hum, not from the tunnel, from within the stone. Callum froze. "Do you hear it?" Eleanor nodded slowly. It wasn't just sound, it was like a presence pulsing through the rock. They pressed on. Eventually, they came to a vast chamber. The air smelled of sea brine and something older, like mold and rust. At the far end was a stone platform, and upon it, a bell. Not a church bell, not even a ship's bell. It was too ancient, too wrong in its shape. Carvings wrapped around it like vines. The symbol was etched deep into the metal. "Is that one of the bells from the legend?" Callum asked, barely above a whisper. Eleanor stepped closer. Her pendant grew hot, tugging at her like a magnet. She reached out, hand trembling, and touched the bell. A sudden flash, not of light, but of memory. A town drowning, voices crying, hands reaching through water. Then darkness. She stumbled back. The chamber trembled. Water began to seep from cracks in the walls, slow and steady. "We need to go," Callum said, grabbing her arm. But as they turned, something stood in the tunnel behind them. Not a person.
Tall. Thin.
Skin like driftwood. Hollow eyes. Eleanor couldn't breathe. The creature lifted a hand, not in greeting, but in warning. Behind it, more shapes stirred in the shadows. Not all who had vanished were gone. Eleanor couldn't move. The creature stood still, its hollow eyes fixed on her, unmoving, unblinking. Behind it, more shapes emerged from the tunnel, silent, gaunt figures cloaked in the same sea-worn pallor. Their forms flickered in the torchlight like ghosts, but the sound of dripping water striking their skin proved otherwise. They were real. Callum pulled Eleanor back slowly, his voice a low whisper. "Don't run." The moment hung, taut as wire. The lead figure stepped forward. It didn't speak, but something stirred in Eleanor's mind. A thought, not her own. "Why have you come?" The question wasn't asked with words. It vibrated inside her skull like an echo in stone. She swallowed. "We're looking for the truth. About Brackmere. About the disappearances. The bells." The creature tilted its head, bones cracking like wet wood. "You have awakened the old sound. It cannot be silenced now." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked. Behind her, the water trickling from the walls began to spread. It wasn't just damp now, it was flooding, slowly, steadily, a silent tide creeping across the stone floor. Callum glanced down. "We need to get out."
"Now."
But the creature raised its hand. The flood halted. "You must listen, or Brackmere will drown again." The chamber dimmed. The torchlight flickered and then faded, but not into darkness. A glow bloomed from the bell. Not golden, but gray.
Cold.
It wasn't light. It was memory. Eleanor gasped. She was no longer in the chamber. She stood on the cliffs, centuries ago, watching the old town of Brackmere below, but it was vast, full of life and stone towers. The sea glimmered with hundreds of ships, and the streets buzzed with trade. Then the bell rang. One toll, then another, then dozens. And the water came. Not like a storm. It rose with purpose, not wind. A wall of sea. The people screamed. The towers cracked. The bells rang louder, as if answering the sea itself. And above it all stood a figure, arms raised, chanting in a forgotten tongue, the pendant around her neck blazing white. The memory shattered. Eleanor was back. Cold sweat on her skin. The creature still stood before her.
"What was that?" she breathed.
"The last truth. You carry the same blood." Eleanor looked down at the pendant. It no longer glowed, but it pulsed. One beat, then another, like a heartbeat, hers but older. "The pendant," she whispered. "It's not just a key." Callum nodded. "It's a signal. A call." The creature stepped back into the shadows. "When the seventh bell rings, the sea will rise again." The chamber trembled. The water surged. Eleanor and Callum turned and ran, the tide chasing them like breathless hounds through the tunnel. Stones cracked above. Darkness snarled at their heels. They didn't look back. The storm had returned. Eleanor and Callum burst from the mouth of the tunnel, soaked and breathless. Rain hammered the moors. The sea beyond the cliffs boiled in a frenzy of waves and wind. They collapsed on the grass, the stone seal of the bell chamber hidden once more behind the thick brambles.
Neither spoke for a long while.
Then Callum whispered, "What did we unleash?" Eleanor didn't answer. She couldn't. The image of the drowning city, the chanting figure, and the creature's hollow voice echoed in her mind. But it wasn't just fear that gnawed at her. It was recognition. The pendant had pulsed like a heartbeat, like it was alive. Back at the cottage, silence reigned. Granddad was sitting by the fire, as though nothing had happened. Yet his eyes, as Eleanor entered, met hers with a heaviness she'd never seen before. "You went down there, didn't you?" he said quietly. Eleanor nodded. "You knew."
He sighed.
"I tried to keep it buried, but it always calls back." "Who are they?"
Callum asked.
"Those things in the chamber." Her grandfather's eyes fell to the hearth. They were the Watchers, once people, chosen to guard the old bell after the first drowning. "Why guard it?" Eleanor asked. "Why not destroy it?" A flash of anger sparked in his eyes. "You don't destroy a tide. You brace for it." He stood, reaching behind the old bookshelf. From a hidden compartment, he drew out a journal, leather-bound, warped with age. He handed it to Eleanor. "Your grandmother wrote this. She was the last bellkeeper." Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened the cover. Inside were pages of symbols, old maps of Brackmere, and accounts of strange weather, disappearances, and bells that rang though buried. "She knew this would happen," Granddad said. "She tried to warn the council. They laughed her out of the room." Callum frowned. "Then, what's the plan now?" But before Granddad could answer, the pendant around Eleanor's neck grew hot. A hum vibrated through the floorboards.
Ding.
It was faint, but undeniable.
A bell.
Not far. Not imagined.
1.
Granddad's face went pale. "The 7th bell," he murmured. It started. Eleanor bolted for the door. "Where did that sound come from?" "The cliffs," said Granddad. "The one bell that was never found." Rain lashed the road as they ran. Eleanor felt the weight of the pendant pulling toward the sea, as if drawn by fate. As they reached the cliffs, a wind howled from the depths. And there, standing by the broken edge of the earth, was a woman in a black cloak. Her face was turned away, hair dancing wildly in the wind. Callum shouted, "Oi! Who are you?" The woman turned. Eleanor froze. It was the woman from the vision. The same eyes. The same pendant. She smiled, not cruelly, but as though she'd been waiting a very long time. And behind her, the sea split open. The sea had opened. Not just parted, but peeled away like curtains of water, revealing a chasm of dark stone descending into the earth's core. The waves did not crash inward. They hung, suspended, as if obeying a command older than time itself. Eleanor stared into the abyss. The woman at the cliff's edge lowered her hood. Her face was pale, eyes storm gray. The same face from the vision. The same pendant glinting against her chest. "You've heard the bell," she said. Her voice echoed unnaturally, as though carried on the wind and the waves at once. Callum stepped in front of Eleanor, protective. "Who are you?" She didn't flinch. "A keeper. Like your grandmother. Like the ones before her." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "Why now?" "Because the chain is nearly complete. One bell remains. Then the gate will open fully." She turned to face the chasm, where distant stone steps spiraled downward into the depths. "You must follow. You're marked now. You both are." Callum glanced at Eleanor, uncertain. But her feet were already moving. The pendant was pulling her, faster now, humming louder with each step. The descent began. They followed the woman down ancient stairs slick with sea spray. Darkness clung to the rock, broken only by faint blue lights pulsing along the path, not lanterns, but glowing symbols carved into the stone itself. Callum muttered, This is mad. Then turn back, the woman said without looking. But he didn't. The spiral narrowed as they descended.
Soon they were walking single file.
The roar of the sea above faded, replaced by silence, so thick it pressed against their ears. Eleanor's thoughts were a storm. Every step brought her closer to something she didn't understand, something ancient waiting. Then they reached a wide platform, the threshold of a vast cavern. And there it was, the final bell. It stood in the center of the chamber, unlike the others, not rusted or ancient, but pristine. Black as obsidian, smooth and gleaming. Around it, 7 empty pedestals. Callum gasped. Wait, that's where the other bells were. The woman nodded. Each bell was a key. And now they have returned to their places. Eleanor looked down. The pendant. It was glowing. From her neck, a sliver of light extended outward, like a tether, reaching toward the black bell. And the moment it touched, the cavern shook.
Ding.
One chime.
Loud.
Final. The sound rang through their bones. The pedestals flared with light. The watchers appeared, not ghostly now, but formed of salt and stone, shaped like the ones in the chamber above. 7 of them, surrounding the bell, their faces expressionless. The woman stepped forward. It is done. Eleanor turned to her. What have we done? The woman met her gaze. You've awakened the last gate. And now, she pointed toward a wall of the chamber. Cracks spread across it like lightning. Now he returns. From the cracks, a darkness bled like ink into the water-soaked stone. A sound emerged, low, inhuman, a sound of hunger and memory and time lost. The final seal was breaking. And behind it, something waited. The sound tore through the chamber. Not a clang or a ring, but a groan, deep and vast, as though the earth itself were exhaling after millennia of silence. The walls split open. From behind it, darkness seeped like oil, thick and alive. Eleanor stumbled back. Callum grabbed her arm, eyes wide in terror. We need to go. But the woman, the keeper, stood firm. Her gaze locked on the darkness, unwavering. You can't run, she said. It's here now. The darkness swirled, took form. Not a body, not quite. A presence. Shifting. Towering. A figure made of shadow and the memory of storm. Eyes opened, countless, glimmering like stars in a night sky. It spoke. Not with a mouth, but into their minds. A chorus of voices, old and broken. You called. Now we answer. Eleanor's knees buckled. The pendant burned against her chest. The figure stepped forward. The cavern trembled. Around the bell, the watchers began to chant, not words, but a hum that grew louder with every breath. The black bell rang again, once, twice, each note sharper, deeper. Callum turned to Eleanor. We can't fight that. The keeper raised her hand. You don't fight it. You bind it. She looked at Eleanor. You are the seal. What? The 9th bell is not forged. It is born. In blood. In legacy. Eleanor's heart pounded. The pendant cracked. A stream of white light burst from it, wrapping around her like flame, lifting her feet from the stone. Her body felt weightless, her mind distant, as if her memories were no longer hers, but part of something older. The voice returned. You are not ready. But she answered, not with words, but with will. The light surged. From her hands, symbols carved themselves into the air, the same runes from the stones, but alive, burning. The figure recoiled. Callum watched, frozen. The chamber itself began to change. The stones pulsed with light. The watchers circled the shadow, their chants now thunderous. The keeper stepped back. Now, child. Eleanor pressed her palms together. The 9th bell formed. Not metal, not stone. Light. Pure and ancient, hovering between her hands. She rang it. The sound was silence. Complete, perfect, and with it, the shadow screamed. It began to unravel, like a thread pulled from the world's edge. The eyes blinked out one by one. The cavern shook, groaned, then cracked apart. Eleanor fell to her knees. The bell shattered into nothingness. The darkness was gone. The watchers faded. The chamber was still. Callum ran to her side. "Ellie." She blinked up at him, dazed. "It's over." But the keeper shook her head.
No.
"It's changed. The gate is sealed, but not destroyed. Balance, not victory." She stepped toward Eleanor, kneeling. "You are the new keeper now." Eleanor looked at her hands. Empty.
Cold.
But something had settled inside her, something ancient, waiting. Above them, the path to the surface began to close. But behind, a faint glimmer, a portal, not of shadow, but of gold.
A choice.
The keeper whispered, "There is always another bell." Then she vanished into the light. Eleanor and Callum stood at the threshold. The story was not over.